So a lot of times an agent or seller will say, call the bank and let them know the package is being submitted. And I want to say to them, they don't care. Until they have a contract, truly, they don't care. And banks will tell you, like with FHA, you have the approval to participate. They have cooperative short sales. They have all these wonderful things. But until there's a contract with a HUD in hand, they can't make a decision. When banks give you the pre-approved short sale, all they did was they ran a list price on the house. That's all they did, okay? Now, the great thing is, now you know what to list the property at. And the bad news is, every agent I've ever met has said, are they crazy if they think I can get that price? Am I right? I mean, they do BPOs and tell you that's what your list price should be. And here's a little known secret on those pre-approved short sales. They don't just run the BPO and tell you what the list price should be. They bump it up from their BPO knowing that you're gonna reduce the price. So they set the price so unrealistically high, it's not worth the paper they're written on, to be very honest with you. So we will start communicating with the lender to postpone foreclosure only if the short sale package has been submitted. What we do, just so you know, is we do not work with the foreclosure department. And you probably all know that the foreclosure department and the short sale department, do they communicate? Of course not. That would be insanity to think that they would work together. So we call the short sale department and say, look, we've been working with you for 3 weeks, 3 days, 3 months, whatever it is. Okay, we're almost at the end here. Do you know that your foreclosure department is trying to foreclose on the property? And the short sale negotiator says, oh, I can't have that, I'm just about done with this file. So we say, exactly, call your foreclosure department and have it postponed. So we work on the postponement through the short sale department, not the foreclosure department. There's another reason we don't work with the foreclosure department. We are not foreclosure consultants. So we do not work with the foreclosure departments. But our efforts through the short sale department, 95% of the time we are successful. Again, foreclosure does happen during the short sale process. It's based on investor guidelines. I will tell you this, the only way that we know about a pending foreclosure is 2 ways. Every time our negotiator picks up the phone to get short sale status, the first question they ask is, has there been a notice of foreclosure filed? It's the first question they ask. And they look in the system, the short sale department says yes or no. But you or the seller can notify us as well. We are based out of Princeton, New Jersey. I do not get the local Charleston paper. I do not have access to find out if your seller has received a foreclosure notice. But if they have, we always tell the seller and the agent, please let us know as soon as possible. We'll make the phone call that day to postpone foreclosure if we've submitted the short sale package. Again, like I said, agents and sellers will have 24/7 access to our portal once we begin negotiations. A lot of time agents just like to email us for status, and that's fine, but we always kind of refer them back to the portal because you'll see the detailed notes between our negotiator and the bank's negotiator. And the seller and agent should not communicate with the lender unless we direct you to do that. So we always say, we're working on the short sale. If you get your seller to call in thinking they can push it along, or if the agent calls in, I will tell you this, it only kind of bungles the process a little bit. Because then the short sale negotiator at the bank says, well, who am I working with? Am I working with Bob Jones, or am I working with Sally Smith? I'm not sure. Communication then goes to the wrong person. Maybe they tell the seller you need to submit a pay stub, but they don't tell us because now they think they're working directly with the seller. So we submit a third-party authorization. Please let us be the person that deals with the bank. There will be times that the banks reach proactively out to the agents and sellers during negotiation. And the agent and seller will always say, how did you not know about this? Okay, because the bank has a borrower outreach department as well. You have a foreclosure department, you have a short sale department, you have a cooperative short sale department, you have vendors, and you have a borrower outreach department. None of them speak to each other. So while the borrower outreach department is trying to get in touch with the seller, we're working on the short sale, and the borrower outreach department doesn't even know it. So we always say to the sellers and the agents, if the bank reaches out to you, just let us know, we'll reach right back out to the bank. So the process is that once you get a contract, you'll go to our website, which is www.platinumgroupservices.com, and you'll click on all other agents. It's right on the home page, you cannot miss it. It says register your seller here. You can't miss it. Click on it. There's about a 1 page of fields that you fill out. Tell us a little bit about the property, a little bit about the seller, and then also who the lien holders are. You hit submit, and within 48 hours, we're going to contact you and the seller. We're going to call you. We're also going to send an email, and it's a welcome email to both you and the seller that says, hi, my name is Melissa, or my name is Joanne, or my name is Rhonda. I'm your appointed counselor. I'll be working on the file. And in those letters, and by the way, you will always be copied on the letters that we send to the seller. In those letters, we give a list of the required docs that are necessary. By the way, if you want to know the required docs, you can also go to our website because it's posted there. So if you start working with the seller, you can tell the seller, go to the website, look at the list of docs, and start gathering them. So we'll tell the seller the docs that they need. We'll set realistic expectations with the seller and with you. We'll tell them what the limitations of services are, that we can't guarantee to postpone foreclosure. We'll tell them that we are MARS compliant and have them sign the appropriate MARS disclosures. We'll get the third-party authorization, and we'll process the entire seller's package. So we say to the seller in the welcome letter, you have 14 days to give us these docs, because you have a contract of sale. Now, I will tell you that 90% of the sellers give us the docs within 3 days. It's perfect. But we have those sellers who take a month or 2 months to get us docs, and I'm not kidding you. So we give a 14-day timeline, and if 14 days goes by and we don't have the docs from the seller, we'll call you and say, look, the seller's dragging their feet and this is never gonna work. Because as you all know, for those of you that have done short sales, how many times does the bank request additional documentation from the seller? Every time, okay? So if you have a seller that won't even give you the initial docs in the first 14 days, that's a seller that's gonna drag their feet when the lender comes back and asks for additional docs. So we have a financial worksheet that we have the seller complete, and we'll assist them with all the forms. We have the lender-specific forms that we send out to the seller. We'll help them with their hardship letter. We absolutely will not write it for them, but we will tell them what the important components of a hardship letter are. We will also run an analytical loss model for the lender. This is pretty cool. We have a very specific software program where we punch in all this data. So we say, when's the last time you made a mortgage payment? Okay, it was 10 months ago. What's the value of your house? What did you originally buy it at? What are the loan balances? Okay, and then we run this loss model for the lender, and it shows, Mr. Lender, this is the loss you're going to take in short sale based on the contract price. This is the loss that you will take if you take it back as an REO, and this is the loss if you sell it at auction. And it's a really compelling argument for them to see in black and white what the difference is between the REO and auction loss versus the short sale loss. Now again, there are investor guidelines that we have to follow, but that is our cover sheet on every package to the bank. And then we'll also obtain the preliminary HUD-1. We do not choose the settlement company, obviously, but I think South Carolina buyer chooses, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so you'll let us know who the buyer has chosen if it's not on the contract. We will contact the title company. We will get the preliminary HUD. We will check the HUD to make sure it's accurate and thorough and it matches the contract. We'll take care of all of that. After we've received all the docs, we have a second level review. We do work with attorneys, and we'll send the contract, the HUD, the hardship letter, and the seller's financial form to the attorney. It takes them literally 10 minutes. They review it and say, you're on track, go ahead and submit it. They do it same day. Like I said, it takes 10 minutes. At that point, when we submit the package to the bank, that's when we'll assign you the user ID and the password to the portal notes so that you can see what we're doing with your file. We will update that a minimum once a week. Now, I think you probably know the short sale process. When you submit the package, the first thing you have to do the next day is call the lender and say, did you receive it? Okay? You might have to call the lender for 3 or 4 days, or if it's SunTrust, you might have to call them for 3 weeks until they verify that they have received your package. Okay? So we'll do that right away and say, confirm, package received. In the very beginning stages, and we'll go through what the lender processes for their short sales, in the very beginning stages, not much happens until a BPO is done and a negotiator is assigned at the bank. So you'll see notes once a week. Once a negotiator is assigned, you'll see a lot more notes, because once we have that point person to talk to at the bank, that's when the communication really heats up. Okay? We'll negotiate with the lender for the short sale decision. We'll communicate that decision to both you and the seller. You do not have to call the seller and break the bad news that there's going to be a deficiency judgment. We'll take care of all of that. We'll get the lender's final approval of the HUD. As you all know, HUDs do need to be approved prior to closing at least 48 hours in advance on short sales. We'll take care of that. We'll submit it to the bank. A lot of times the title companies want to do it. That's fine if we're confident in the title company's ability to do that. That's fine. But what we've seen happen is that a final HUD differs from the approved HUD, and let me tell you something, that can really mess up a short sale. And then we'll work with the title company to close without complications. So that's what we'll do for you. That's our services that we can offer to you. The fee structure for our services is as follows. We list a 1% fee on the HUD, on the seller's side of the HUD. The minimum's $1,500, the maximum is $5,000. Depends on the sales price, but 1% is what we put on there. We put it in section 1300 of the HUD. It's called a settlement fee. Okay? If the lender does not approve at least $1,500, the agent is responsible for the difference. So if the lender only approves $1,000 fee to us, the agent would be responsible for $500, okay? That's only if we get 5% or more approved for the agent. So if we have a file where the agent gets a 4% commission, we're not gonna say to the agent, you owe us any money. It doesn't matter if we get paid at all from the lender, you owe us nothing. But if we earn 5% or more for the agents, then the agent is responsible for the difference in the fee. I will tell you that the average fee that we earn from lenders is $1,700. We put $1,500 as a price point because A, it's what enables us to do the work and make a little bit of a profit, and B, it's very realistic that the lenders 9 times out of 10 will pay at least that much. The average is $1,700 that we've been paid. So if we get, say 6%, the lender approves 1,000, you'd be responsible for 500. If the lender approves 1,500, you're responsible for nothing. So let's talk about what you need to know prior to listing property. And by the way, in the back of the room, there's a couple of handouts, okay? And the first one is questions to ask in a short sale transaction. So I want you all to pick that up when you leave. And it says prior to listing and prior to contract. These are questions that you should be asking of the seller before you take a listing or before you sign a contract. So first you have to figure out, does the seller qualify? Well, what constitutes a short sale? Anybody tell me? There's two main things, negative equity and a hardship. Okay, you have to have both. Okay, strategic defaults. Who knows of strategic defaults in here? Strategic default is when a seller says, it's not worth my while to make the mortgage payment because this is a depreciating asset. It's not worth my while. I want to short sell it. The banks do not go for strategic defaults. They want to see a true hardship. So the hardship has to prevent the seller from being able to make a mortgage payment. And the question always is, what constitutes a hardship? Anything that prevents them from making a payment. It could be a divorce, it could be a relocation, it could be a medical crisis, it could be a number of things. And you know, we hear all the time that, you know, I lost my job, so I'm going to Florida to get a job. Does that constitute a hardship? It actually does, because you're not expected to maintain 2 households. Now, if you have $100,000 in the bank and are making enough money to afford both households, then you don't have a hardship. So first you have to figure out, does the seller truly qualify? Does the seller have assets? If they do, the bank's going to want some of them. The bank is going to want the seller contribution, and that includes, we have seen 401ks. Now I will tell you this, when we see $30,000, $40,000 in a 401k, the lenders typically don't go after that. But we have seen sellers have $400,000 and $500,000 in 401ks, and the lenders have gone after $40,000 or $50,000 of it, typically 10%. It's not worth their while. Basically, the 401k is down to the $30,000, $40,000 range, but that question we get a lot, can they go after the 401k? The answer is yes. They can't go after a seller's equity in another property. But if the seller has assets, please know that the lender will want a seller contribution. Is the seller delinquent or in imminent danger of becoming delinquent? Because if they are, it does help the short sale package. Does the seller have funds to pay for personal liens and judgments or for past due homeowners dues? Because I will tell you what I see all the time is that the agent's commission is like a slush fund to delinquent sellers. When they have to pay $1,500 for the homeowners, who's the first person that they go to? You. Am I wrong? It happens all the time. So you might want to ask the question up front, how delinquent are you on the homeowners dues? If they say they're $2,000 delinquent, figure that they're going to have to pay 25 to 50% of that to the homeowners. Again, like I said, they can go to the homeowners and settle typically for 25 to 50 cents on the dollar. But if they don't have those funds, where are they going to get the money from? You have to ask those questions. If they have an $11,000 IRS lien, where are they going to get the money from to clear that lien, to go to closing? So those are questions that you have to ask, and you have to be ready that the seller's going to come and ask you to contribute. And also, will all parties on the note cooperate? So we see this a lot in divorce cases. And by the way, we will gladly work with, if the sellers are going through divorce, we'll work with them separately. We will never merge their docs. We will never have them speak to each other. We're very sensitive to that. But we do see from time to time where a spouse says, I really don't care if the house goes into foreclosure. My credit's already ruined. I could care less. I'm not cooperating. It takes all parties on the note to cooperate. If we have just one party, the short sale's not going to work. So those are questions that you need to ask as well. As far as pricing, and we get this question all the time because some agents think that a short sale is like a fire sale. It's not. As you know, the lenders do their own BPO or broker price opinion. And you're gonna have to come pretty close on the contract price to that broker price opinion. So we always say to list the property at or close to fair market value. And for the most part, short sales are in decent condition. They're not like foreclosures where they're in terrible condition. So you should be able to get close to fair market value. Like I said, the average short sale sells at 9% below fair market value. Okay, it doesn't sell at 20 and 30 and 40% below. It sells at 9% below. We always tell the agents, list a property, and every 21 days, if you don't have activity, do incremental price drops, because that's what the banks do. All the banks have a pricing tool. And some banks will go 42 days in the beginning and then drop every 21 days, but a lot of the banks start decreasing their internal pricing tool every 21 days, meaning their price on what they'll accept. But like I said, it's not a fire sale. And miscellaneous things that you need to know prior to listing is, was this short sale previously approved? So perhaps the property was listed with another agent, it went through the short sale process and it got approved, but for whatever reason it didn't go to closing. 9 times out of 10 it's because the buyer walked, by the way. If that's the case, you want to ask the seller, okay, what price was it approved at? Because the banks do these BPOs and they're good for 90 days. How many of you have tried to appeal a bank's BPO? It's not an easy process. It's doable, but it's not an easy process. Because banks do a BPO and they say, oh, I'll do another one. You just have to wait 90 days. It's like, well, that doesn't help me on this contract. The buyer's going to walk. Well, then the buyer walks, but I saw the BPO that's good for 90 days. And banks have certain guidelines on when they'll even do an appeal. And I'll give you an example. Bank of America has what they call the Delta. Again, I'm with Bank of America, sorry. But if your contract price is not at least 20% off from their BPO, they won't even consider an appeal. 20% is a lot. So if you have, let's say, a BPO at $200,000 and you have a contract price that's at $170,000 and you want to appeal the BPO, you're not 20% off. Bank says, I won't even look at it. You have to be 20% off, which to me is ridiculous. So it's really important to find out if a short sale was approved before, what was the price that it was approved at. You also want to protect your commission. Lenders are much better now about paying 6% than they were before. But we've all seen short sales close in which the commission's been reduced to 5%. Why is the commission reduced? Well, for one of two reasons. Number one, you have no control over investor guidelines. Number two, you have control over, and that's called price. If the bank is not getting their net required, what's the first thing they do? They say, well, if I just go in and slash some fees, some title fees and the agent's commission, and don't allow to pay any homeowners, I'll get my net. So that's all the more reason that you want to sell at close to fair market value, because it helps protect your commission. But you also want to protect your commission with the other agent on the other side of the transaction. So that if a bank makes a reduction in a commission, that you split the reduction with the other agent. Now, every company I've ever talked to has their own form that they use that protects them from a reduction in commission. I'm sure you have the same form. So just make sure that you use that form on short sales, just in case the lender reduces your commission. Do not list your own property, okay? I always say to agents, a lot of agents do short sales, list it with somebody else in your office, because you're not gonna get a commission on it, the other agent can earn a commission. And they always look for non-arm's length. So when they see that the agent is a family member of the seller, the banks, you know, they always want the non-arm's length affidavit signed. It's hard to sign if it's not the case, but also they'll cut your commission if they feel that it's not a non-arm's length. So here's what you need to know prior to accepting a contract. We talked about what you need to know prior to listing. Now before you get a contract in, here's some important points you need to know. What you communicate to the buyer is by far the #1 thing that will keep the buyer engaged in the short sale. And what we see, people ask us all the time, why don't short sales close? It's not because of foreclosure. That's only, you know, a handful of times. It's because buyers walk. And like I said, it takes on average 3 contracts to get a short sale to closing. That means the first 2 buyers walk. Agents sometimes don't want to have the conversation with the buyer's agent or with the buyer directly. I implore you to do this because you will keep the buyer engaged and the short sale will close. You have to set realistic expectations. We're going to talk about that. Do not accept low offers, because I will tell you, if the lender's net is not met, they'll do one of 2 things. They will deny your property or they'll start to reduce fees, including your commission. So please accept offers that are close to fair market value. A lot of agents feel that, oh my God, I've marketed the property for 2 months or 3 months. I finally have an offer. It's extremely low, but I have to accept it. And of course, you have to present it to the seller. But the seller still has a right, because the seller still owns the property, to turn that offer down. And if the offer's too low, what you're doing is you're taking the property off of the market for 30 to 60 to 90 days, waiting for a denial. You've wasted 30 to 60 to 90 marketing days. Okay, allow for 60 days on the third-party approval. In the short sale addendum, we see this all the time. Third-party approval will be had in 14 days. Well, not by us. I mean, we're good, but we're not that good, okay? If you say to the buyer, it's gonna take about 60 days, and that is about the average time frame, unless you're working with SunTrust or unless you have an FHA file, the buyer will stay engaged. But if you overpromise and underdeliver to a buyer by saying to them 14 days for short sale approval, they're walking in 30 days. So we require that you list 60 days on the short sale addendum. That way we know that the buyer has realistic expectations. Also, you should be ready to settle within about 30 days after third-party approval, okay? When the lenders issue an approval, I think we've all seen this, I laugh at this. We get the approval on May 1st and it says must close by May 20th. Like, are you kidding? Have you all seen that? It's ridiculous, okay? It's for a couple of reasons. It's based on either the date of the BPO expiring, or it's based on the delinquency level. And what the investor says, we have to foreclose on such and such a date, they'll always issue the short sale approval prior to that date. So you have to be prepared to settle pretty quickly. And I'm going to talk about how you can help the buyer settle pretty quickly in just a moment. Also in the contract, list 1 to 3% in seller's concessions. The banks tend to not pay more than 3%. There are some banks, and they're few and far between. I think Citi's one of them, right, Kim? They're going to just give the net. They say, look, I don't care about fees. This is my net. Do whatever you want on the HUD, that's my net. Okay? So with Citi, if you want to pay a 10% seller concession to the buyer, go right ahead. If you want to list a 7% agent commission, go right ahead. They just give you a net. But 95% of the lenders go line by line and say, I allow this, I don't allow this. I allow this, I don't allow that. We actually have the form from Bank of America, kind of got it on the slide, that says what they approve. They cut a lot of title fees. They don't want to see file archive fees, doc prep fees. They cut a lot of title fees, okay? They have a limit on when they'll pay homeowners dues and when they won't. But they also have a maximum concession to the buyer, and that's 3%. If the seller has an FHA loan, they're going to allow 1% to the buyer. So if you say to the buyer, you're going to get 6%, just know when it comes back and the buyer gets approved for 3% or 1%, the buyer's going to walk, because the buyer doesn't have the funds to close. So the more realistic you are in that contract, the more chances you have of keeping the buyer engaged. Kim, don't fall asleep on my job there, Kim. I'm relying on you.
I got distracted.
Okay, the closing agent. So this is critical, like I talked about. When it comes to closing the file, a lot of times what we've seen is the title company, we give them the approved HUD and the approval. Okay, we say, here's the approved HUD, make sure it matches. What do you think that the closing agent does? They add fees on and they submit it to the bank themselves. The bank says, I don't think so, and they start slashing fees on the HUD. We've seen this happen numerous times. So, you know, working with the right closing agent is very important. So the prelim HUD and the final HUD need to match. If we get the final HUD from the agent, we make sure it matches. That's why we always say to the title company, give us the final HUD, we'll review it prior to submitting it to the lender. The HUDs need to include all fees. So we'll get these HUDs and we're like, the title company has no fees, that's odd. And then, sure enough, when you get the final HUD, the title company has added $700 worth of fees. Well, guess what? Once you have an approval, it's very hard to go back to the lender and say, look, I know that you approved X amount of fees, but can you just approve an additional $700 and take that off your net? How willing do you think the lender is willing to do that? Not very willing. Also, what the title companies have to do is make sure they do a verbal on the homeowners. They have to call the homeowners, because a lot of times it's not a lien yet, and say, is the seller past due? Because again, when that doesn't happen, and we submit a prelim HUD to a lender, and they approve it, and they don't see any past due homeowners, then we submit a final HUD to the lender and say, oops, there's $1,500 worth of homeowners dues. Do you think the lender will pay at that point in time? You know what the lender says? Let's start this process from the beginning. It truly does happen. So working with the right title company is very, very important. We also say to the title company, date the HUD 90 days out. So when you're looking at prorated taxes and everything, assume that this transaction will be closing in 90 days. Forget that the contract says it's going to close in 30. Assume 90. That's realistic. I also want to take a moment, now Kim, I do have a slide on there about Walker Jackson, correct?
I believe so.
Okay, but I want to take a moment just to discuss this, and if I get to it later, I'm sorry for being repetitive. We've talked about getting to the closing table on time. And, you know, Dan stood up here and talked about Walker Jackson, and we've worked with Walker Jackson in other areas as well. They're fantastic.